Alright, this is quiz corrections number 14. Number 1 says give the amplitude or period as requested. So it gives us a period of y equals -3 cosine of 1 over 4x. So the first step would be write the equation, which is y equals a cosine of b of x. The next step would be find the amplitude, which you take the absolute value of the a value, which is -3. So the absolute value of -3 would be 3. And that's the amplitude. The next step would be find the period, which is 2 pi over b. And the b value is 1 over 4, so you just substitute it in. And then you can multiply the reciprocal, 2 pi over 1 times 4 over 1, which gives you 8 pi over 1. Which simplifies down to 8 pi, and the answer for the period would be 8 pi, and that's letter C. And that's number 1 for quiz corrections number 14.
So, we are asked to find the amplitude of y equals 4 sine of x. We know the amplitude equals the absolute value of a, and if y equals a sine b x minus c, we know that the a value equals 4. So the absolute value of a equals 4. So 4 is our amplitude.
To find the vertical translation of y equals 5 plus 2 sine parentheses 6x plus pi over 6 parentheses, first you need to factor it. Once you factor out the 6, you get y equals 5 plus 2 sine 6 multiplied by x plus pi. Once you have it factored, you find the variables. So a is 2 right here, b is 6, c is pi, and d is 5. We already know that d is the vertical translation, so the vertical translation is 5.
Alright, so our problem was number 4 on quiz number 14. The question was find the period of y equals -2 sine parentheses 4x plus pi over 2 and end of parentheses. So you want to start off by finding the amplitude, the b value, and c and d if any. So here we can see our a value is -2, which is the amplitude, which would turn into 2, and our b value would be 4, since you would factor out 4 from the equation inside the parentheses. We know that period is 2 pi over b, therefore you would plug in 2 pi over 4, which would be reduced to pi over 2.
Thank you, Ms. Ring.
I love math.
So for number 5 on quiz number 14, it says to find the phase shift of this equation. To start off, you have to take out the 4. You have to divide what's in the parentheses by 4 so you can simplify the equation. Then you can work with it. So it would be y equals -2 sine, and the 4 would be on the outside. And then it would be x minus pi over 2 divided by 4. So we have pi over 2. We have pi over 2 divided by 4, which equals pi over 2 times 1 over 4. This would equal pi over 8. So in the parentheses, pi over 8 would go inside. So the phase shift is the c value, which is right here. But we have to remember that a negative is placed before. So the real phase shift would be a positive pi over 8, which would equal pi over 8 units to the right, which is letter D.
Which of the equations below matches the graph? And we are given these 4 equations, and we know it can't be a starting off because it's cosine, and cosine doesn't start at 0, so we'll get rid of that one. And then we're left with those 3, and so we need to find the periods for each. If we were to find period for b, which is the same thing as d, it would be 2 pi times 3 over 1, which will give you 6 pi. And it can't be 6 pi because the period is 4 over 3, and that's for 2. So if we were to find C, it would be 2 pi over B, which is equal to 2 pi over 3. And 2 pi over 3 is not here too, but it's not showing it, but this is over 2 periods. So if we were to cut this, this is over 2 periods, so it'll be, and this will be 1 full period right here. So this will be 2 pi over 3. And so we know it also can't be B or D, so we're left with C. Y equals -2 sine of 3x.
Here we have question number 7 for quiz number 14. Number 7, match the equations to the graphs below. So number 1, the first option, we have sine 1/2 x. As we know, sine starts at 0, and the equation for a period is 2 pi over b. So our b here is 1/2. We just input that into the equation, and so it would be 2 pi over 1, and we multiply to the reciprocal. 2 pi times 2 straight across, multiply as 4 pi. So we look over to the graphs here. It cannot be A because it starts at 1, and that is a cosine graph, so that can't work. D as well is a cosine graph, and as we take a look at C, it cannot be C because the first period here is pi, and that is equal to 2 pi, so that can't work. It would have to be B because our first period here is 2 pi, and here's 2 pi, and that adds up to 4 pi, so our answer would be B.
For number 2, we have y 1/2 cosine of x. Our amplitude is 1/2, and our b value is 1. We would plug that in into 2 pi over b, which would be 2 pi over 1, and we get a period of 2 pi. Now, if we look over the graphs, it says from the equation that our graph is going to be cosine, so it can't be b or c. And our amplitude tells us that it will only go all the way up to 1/2, so it can't be a either because a goes to 1, so it has to be D.
For number 3, y equals 1/2 sine x. The amplitude is 1/2. The b value is 1. So the period would be 2 pi over 1, which would be 2 pi. And if we go over to the graphs, graph C, the amplitude is 1/2, and since sine starts at 0, the answer would be C.
And for number 4, the last one, we have cosine of NRB is 1/2. So if we go over to the graph, the only one left that is cosine is A.
We're going to be going over number 8 from quiz 14. So for this problem, you want to identify that we only have A and B. A is also amplitude, and we use B to find the period, and to find period we're going to be using 2 pi over B. Just plug it in, so 2 pi over pi cancels out, which just equals to 2. After this, you're left with the period, but you also want to do the inequality to get your start and end. So you want to plug everything to the right in for x, so pi x, and then just bring it down. You want to cancel out the pi, so pi over 1 just cancels out. If you do the same thing to 0, it's just 0, and then if you do it to 2 pi, you just get 2. So this is your start and end. So on the graph, you want to identify your points. So half of 2 is 1, half of 1 is 1 over 2, and then you add these together and then you get 3 over 2. After this, you want to identify your x values.
So here we have 0, 1 over 2, 1, 3 over 2, and then 2. And since all you're going to be getting are the quadrant angles from the unit circle, you can simply skip the step and just go with cosine pi over x. So then you end up left with 1, 0, -1, 0, and then just 1. And then you can also, after this, go in with your amplitude of 3. So then you're stuck with, so then you get 3, 0, -3, 0, and then 3. And you use this to draw your function. So identify on the graph where 3 and -3 are. And then at 0, you're at 3. At 1/2, you're at 0. At 1, you're at -3. At 3 over 2, you're at 0. And at 2, you're at 3. And you should get something that looks like this. It looks like a bucket because this is cosine. You always want to make sure you're using a ruler too. And that's about it. Thank you. I love math.
This is quiz number 14. Quiz corrections for number 9. Question 9 says, graph the following trig functions over one period. Be sure to include a table of values and label your axis clearly. Y equals 3, -6 sine 2x plus pi over 2. First, identify the A, B, C, D value. A equals 6, B equals 2, C equals pi over 2, and D equals 3. To find period, use 2 pi over b, plug in your b value, which is 2, and it will equal to 2 pi over 2. Carry out a 2, and the period is pi. For the c value, start with 0 is less than or equal to x, x is less than or equal to 2 pi. Then plug in your number, and you get 0 is less than or equal to 2, x plus pi over 2 is less than or equal to 2 pi. Divide by 2 to all sides. You get 0 is less than or equal to x plus pi over 2 is less than or equal to pi. Subtract pi over 2 to all sides and you get negative pi over 2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to pi. And you get your starting and ending point. For table of values, you label start to finish. Start with negative pi over 2 and pi. Find half of pi, which is pi over 2. Find half of pi over 2, which is pi over 4. Then last plug in is 3 pi over 4. Write down x values. All pi over 2, all values. Then add the sign values, which is 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. Multiply by 6 because of the amplitude. Lastly, add 3 to all values, and your graphing points are 3, 9, 3, -3, 0. And then lastly, you graph everything